Hi, I'm Josh and welcome back to another video on GCSE English Language. Today we're going to be talking about a way that you can go into the exam knowing exactly what features to use and look for. This method is easy to remember and simple to understand. It's an acronym called M.A.S.S.I.V.E. Whether you're on paper 1 or paper 2, reading or writing, you're going to find this acronym really useful. Now in paper 1 this method is useful for the writing question, as it gives you a handy checklist to work off of. If you've already watched my video on the imaginative writing question in paper 1, you'll know what I mean, and if you haven't, go ahead and give that a quick watch before this one. You might find it helpful. In paper 1 you can also use M.A.S.S.I.V.E. for the reading questions. It will guide you on what to look for when reading those extracts. Remember, they can be quite tricky. In paper 2, you can still use parts of M.A.S.S.I.V.E. to guide you through both the reading and the writing questions. But your mileage may vary. It depends on the extracts and questions you do get given at the end of the day. So, M.A.S.S.I.V.E. It's an acronym. Now, acronyms are handy ways to remember long strings of information by taking the first letter of each word you'd like to remember and turning those letters into its own word. Acronyms are also known as mnemonics, but the difference is small and not really important for this video. Acronyms are not without their flaws though. Unless you revise them and use them, you'll likely forget them or they'll jumble up with other ones you've learned. Now, some learners just don't get on with them, or would prefer to make their own up. Now, that's totally okay. We all learn differently, and there are loads of other styles of revision. Now, let me know in the comments if you'd like a video going through lots of different revision methods that you may not have heard of before. So, let's get started. The M in M.A.S.S.I.V.E. stands for metaphor. A metaphor is when you describe an emotion, a place, a person, thing, or idea as something else to express a certain quality about it. Let's give you an example here. Rather than saying she was brave, you could say she had the heart of a lion, which implies she has the qualities of a lion. Now, metaphors aren't literal. This girl hasn't exactly got the actual heart of a lion, but they're really great if you want to add a bit of depth to descriptions. They make your examiner think about your meaning. Now, high-grade writing answers often have large amounts of metaphors in them, and often they drive the whole story. For example, if you want to write a story that's a tragedy, you can use lots of metaphors throughout, which imply sadness or distress. This links to show, don't tell, which is a really important concept in your writing. In the reading questions, metaphors are counted as a language feature, and are normally present in extracts across both papers, although they mostly appear in paper 1. They are fantastic things to explore, and they're fantastic things to infer things from. An inference is a core concept of any reading question. Try to think, what does this metaphor imply about the character's situation or thoughts? Now in paper 2, where question 3 is always about interesting or engaging the reader, metaphors are there to spark an interest in the reader, to challenge them, to give them clues. Why would the author want to do this? Now try to fit some of that into your explanation. The A in M.A.S.S.I.V.E. stands for adjectives. Adjectives are describing words. They're one of your basic classes of words, and they're the heavy hitters that describe your objects, people, places, things or thoughts, often known as the noun collective. Now, throwing lots of adjectives into your writing is really important. Sensory language and emotive language need adjectives to function. Now, don't settle for basic ones. Get creative and interesting with them, and I'll cover those later on in this video. Now, for the reading questions across both papers, picking out adjectives is great and often forms the core of the identify questions. However, for the language and structure questions and the evaluate questions, it's not enough to rely on spotting and exploring these on their own, but they make excellent ideas to focus in on if you want to explore a main point just that little bit more. The first S in M.A.S.S.I.V.E stands for Similes. Now the word itself is quite close to the word similar, which should give a little hint to its purpose and its usage. It's used to show how something is similar to something else. Similes are a little bit like metaphors, and they give someone, somewhere, or something the qualities of something else. The difference is, with a simile, is that you use the word like or as. So rather than saying she had the heart of a lion, you would say she was like a lion. Now the effect is much the same. Metaphors allow for more reader interpretation though, so use a simile if you want to be clear about what you mean. Now, this is a double-edged sword. While being clearer is all well and good, you sometimes want to make your reader or your examiner think that little bit harder about what you really mean. The second S in M.A.S.S.I.V.E stands for sensory language. Now, this language feature is an absolute must for your writing, as along with adjectives, makes your work engaging, makes it deep, makes it detailed. I've already covered on how to use sensory language in my imaginative writing video, so go on over and check it out. See how you can turn your work into some really high grade stuff. Now in the reading questions across both papers, sensory language is the one language feature you'll find in the extract nearly 100% of the time, and one you can explore deeply. Certain senses are there to impart fear, uncertainty, and those senses usually are hearing and smells. They often mean something's hidden from sight. Now touch is often used to creep out the reader or make them bond closely with the extract's character through a shared experience. Often sensory language can link closely to emotive language, which we'll explore shortly. Now the I in M.A.S.S.I.V.E stands for imagery. Imagery is kind of a catch-all term. That means how the writer has chosen to describe things and the language features they've done to do so. Imagery can also be used in the structure of your writing though, as you could write a piece that has dramatic shifts in imagery to show that you can manipulate tone. I go into more detail on this process, known as the big flip, in my imaginative writing video. In your reading questions, you can evaluate the author's use of imagery and the techniques they use to show it throughout the extract. You really need to show that examiner that you've read the whole thing though, and that you can evaluate it as a whole. So, why not check out and judge how well or how badly the author has described things and how you might improve them. For your comparison questions, identify the difference between how both writers use imagery and for what purpose as well. The V in M.A.S.S.I.V.E stands for vocabulary. Much like imagery, it's a catch-all term, and it means the range of words used in a piece of writing. When you're attempting those writing questions, the examiner will want to see that you know lots of multisyllabic words, and most importantly, you don't use the same word twice in a sentence. Now you can revise synonyms to help yourself with this, or use the extract as a word bank. In your reading questions across both papers, vocabulary is a great thing to analyse and evaluate. Why authors choose to use certain words rather than others is a great thing to examine. Remember though, your examiner is looking for your interpretation, and as long as it's well evidenced and explained, it doesn't have to line up with what they are thinking. Now bear in mind, vocabulary isn't really a language feature, it's not really a structure feature. You can't rely on it solely as a thing you can analyse, but it makes an excellent companion to other strong features, either structure or language. When you're comparing vocabulary in paper 2, look at the range of words each author uses. Does one rely on more, intelligent language? Does one rely on more basic language? Why? What's the difference between their audiences, do you think? Have a look and see what vocabulary does for the overall story in these pieces. Okay, last but not least, the E in M.A.S.S.I.V.E stands for emotive language. Emotive language is a language feature which means writing to show emotion. Now it's very important in your own writing because imaginative or transactional, if you don't make your examiner care, they're not going to give you the marks you deserve. Make sure to change up these emotions throughout. No one wants to read an imaginative story that's sad the whole way through. Now in your transactional writing, your feelings need to be soft enough to lure the reader in and remain professional, but hard enough to make your point. In your reading questions, emotive language is a big point scorer in the analysis questions across both papers. In paper 1, questions relating to the mental state or feel of a scene are quite common, so identifying how and why the emotive language is used is really important. In paper 2, in your evaluation questions, look at those emotional resonances the author's trying to build up with the reader. Think about in your comparison questions, is one more or less emotional, and why? Now let's take a look at some of the ways you can hack the exam. First things first, write it down the moment you open your paper. On the extract, on the question paper, on the writing sheet, put it there to remind you on what to look for and what to talk about. You might find it easy to write the initial letter above some of the quotes you identify on the extract to save time, using S1 and S2 for sensory language and similes. In your writing, use it as a checklist. Tally off every time you use a metaphor, every time you use some sensory language. Now when you're revising for the exam, highlight each letter in a different colour. While the answer sheets often say don't use highlighters on these sheets, it doesn't mean you can't go crazy on the extract using all the colours you like. Colours help us remember. 20% more information goes into your brain and is retained if you use colour somehow or some way when revising. So use everything you have to improve those chances to recall M.A.S.S.I.V.E right. So we've come to the end of the video. As usual, any questions, comments, ideas, you just let me know. And if you haven't already done so, do check out my other videos on the channel. Good luck, stay safe, keep revising.